Welcome to Creating Your Tech Journal. My name is Melissa Esquibel, and I'm so happy you could join us for this admin chat. Last year during ES Tech, Ann Hiatt and I, unbeknownst to each other, both suggested creating a tech journal to support you on your learning journey. So today we're going to talk about what a tech journal is, where you can store it, in other words, where you should put all this information, and that's going to depend a lot on what you want to do with it later, and then finally, what goes in it. So a tech journal is really a to-do list for your learning journey. You're going to populate this with all sorts of things and then decide what it is you're going to learn, and then hopefully record that you learned it, how you applied it. So it then becomes a tracking mechanism for your learning objectives. Now, if those learning objectives happen to be part of performance reviews, you will then be able to create this journal which can be evidence of your meeting your tech learning objectives. So the to-do list. This should be made up of things that interest you, and I put that first on the list because those things that you're really interested in are the things you're going to learn. When you read an article, hear something in the workplace, hear about an app in social media that everybody's using, and you're like, boy, I could really use something like that, that interests you. So make sure those get in there. Things you don't understand. So if you're on the job and you hear a bunch of geeks talking about some techie thing and you're like, I have no idea what they're talking about, but you keep hearing the same terminology or the same acronyms, jot those down. Those can be part of your to-do list. Organizational jargon. And here, for organizations that have their own proprietary systems and applications, you keep hearing them mentioned. You might not see them anywhere in the news or in social media, but they keep getting mentioned in meetings or around discussions in your organization. Those types of things, write them down. Really anything that makes you go, I love the idea of spending some time once a month, once a week, reading some technology newsletters or going to websites and seeing what's new in security, for example, viruses, malware, anything that makes you go, that's interesting to you, wrapping back around to that first point, jot it down. Keeping in mind that just because you jot it down doesn't mean you have to do anything about it. But the more you jot down, the more fodder you have for your tech learning journey. Let's discuss where it should go. So for example, if you're a pen and paper person, I know it's a tech journal, that's just fine. If it's with you all the time or with you most of the time, or you always use a paper planner, reserve a couple of pages at the back or bookmark some pages where you can quickly get to it, jot something down that you heard. So paper notebook, perfectly acceptable. Note-taking apps, Google Keep, Microsoft's OneNote, if you like Evernote, any kind of note-taking app will also serve the purpose to support your tech journal. Kanban apps are especially useful. Things like Trello, Planner, these lend themselves to really being a great tracking mechanism, and we're going to take a look at Trello here in a bit. Voice notes. So kind of going back to the idea of the paper notebook, if you're used to recording voice notes, if you're used to voice activated applications, if you're used to using your devices like your phone or tablet and quickly recording voice notes, then that's comfortable for you. That can also take the form of your tech journal. But whatever you choose, be consistent and make sure you can get to it quickly. We all remember being in that meeting or in that conversation where somebody's talking about something, we're like, I want to know more about that. And in 5 minutes after walking away from that conversation going, what was that thing? So make sure you have it at the ready and be consistent with how you use it. Let's take a look at OneNote. Yes, I'm a OneNote fan, but you can use most of your note-taking apps very similarly to what you're seeing here. So in OneNote, you have this thing called a to-do tag. You can type your list of items, and once you apply the to-do tag to the first one, every time you press enter, it will give each new line its own checkbox. Then when you learn about it or you figure out what it means, you can simply check it off the list. That's a very, very simple version of a tech journal. Getting another layer here, if you use a table in OneNote or a Word document or even an Excel spreadsheet, and you can certainly create a table in Evernote, you can now create columns that give you more information. So not only, for example, do I want to know more about SQL or SQL, but this is the date that I discovered that I wanted to learn more about it. Then when I've learned it, I can mark it off and then give the definition and how it relates to my work. So in this case, SQL means structured query language, and it's used to retrieve data from databases for our reports. So that's the context in which I heard it. Now I understand how it's used. And I also happen to learn that it's written behind the scenes when you use something called Power Query. Now, if that's what I wrote down, Power Query can become another line item, and I can go learn all about Excel's Power Query. That becomes another learning objective. Be prepared for that. So when you write down something like VBA, Visual Basic for Applications, you might also learn that it's a really good idea to stop using macros as a primary piece of how you work with your Excel spreadsheets, because a lot of macros were written to do things that Excel now does natively. Less programming, less maintenance. So everything that you learn on your learning journey and record in your tech journal may lead you to another line item. So tables are a great way to do that. Now, if you choose to use a table in Word or Excel or Docs or Sheets, just make sure it's easily accessible to you. So the hot tip is, it's great if it's in an Excel spreadsheet, but if that spreadsheet only lives somewhere that you can get to on your computer and you hear about something while you have your phone, well, now you have to try to remember it till you get back to your computer. So whatever you use, just make sure you can get to it everywhere you might need it. Now, if you decide to create a document with a table or a spreadsheet, then store that in the cloud somewhere so that you can get to it from all your devices and keep up with all the things that you're wanting to learn. Now, this next example actually uses a very cool feature in OneNote called copy link to paragraph and paste link to paragraph. So let's say we copied from meeting minutes some text that had terms we didn't understand, like here again we see VBA, SQL, HTML. What you can do is, you copy and paste it, and as you see terms that you want to know, you can use Control-Alt-H or simply the highlighting tool to highlight it. Then create a glossary page, and as you record these definitions, you can do a right-click, copy link to paragraph, and then go back to the context, double-click. You can use Control-K to then create the link, or you can simply do insert and click on the link button. That way you have the term used in context, and you can click it and get back to the definition. What I like about this particular method is it can become part of your desk manual. So if you're training somebody for your job because you're moving up the ladder because you are so astute at technology, you can actually hand this off to somebody going, here are some terms, common terms you're going to hear when you're taking meeting minutes, and here's how to find what those mean. So it can be really useful and create a resource all by itself called a glossary. So that is another way that you can use OneNote. You'll find some similar features. You can always just copy and paste a link to Keep, copy and paste a link to a web page if you want to in Evernote or whatever you might be using if you're using a note-taking app. Just keep in mind that knowing the term is useful, knowing how it's used in your world is even more useful. Now, Trello, which is a Kanban app, is another thing you can use to create your tech journal. So in this case, I've just created a card called My Tech Journal and have those 3 terms in. Now you'll notice labels are available in Trello. Most of them will also have some way for you to categorize or label these items. Purple is something that I want to learn. Green is something that I've learned. And once I've learned it, I can go into that little line item, as I did here with HTML, and say, I want to take a course on HTML and I want to learn how to create a simple website in WordPress. So off the learning objective or the to-do item of HTML, what does that mean? What is it used for? I'm going to create these other learning objectives. And then you can go in and document when you've done that. So create a checklist in there. You can do lots of different things here in this card on HTML. Now, if what you find that most of your learning journey is just terms, what does that term mean? And once you get the definition, you're fine. You don't need to necessarily use a Kanban app or even anything as complex as the copy link to paragraph or a really involved OneNote page. You can just jot them down, check them off when you learn them, maybe type a little definition. But if you're going to tie this to a learning objective, especially one on which you'll need to provide evidence, then this becomes a really good way to do that. Now, if you want to take this to another level in Trello, you can create a simple, a workspace that is just your learning objective. So in this case, I've got one called coding and one called Excel. And within those topics, I have things that I'm tracking around what I'm learning. Now, in this case, talking about learning pivot tables, this is saying what I did. I did some troubleshooting for Lee on her pivot table to see why it wasn't updating. I reverse engineered one of our pivot tables because I learned how to do that in a class and understood how it was made so that you can then make one. I took a webinar on pivot tables, so this is actually getting very much into detail. I would use this for things that you are going to be measured on in performance review. This is really a good way to do that. Get very granular about not only learning it, but applying it. I think it's cool to know what things are. It's even cooler when you can apply that knowledge on the job. And in a setup like this or any other Kanban app that allows you this many levels of information to record, you can really track that. And it can also help when someone says, how do I learn pivot tables? Well, let me go into my card. Here are the things I did. And that can help somebody else on their learning journey. So let's speak more granularly about what goes in the tech journal. So for example, specific technology learning goals. Now these are learning goals that you already know that you need to have. So if you've taken on a new responsibility and that responsibility is very spreadsheet heavy, you're like, yep, I need to get better at Excel. You know that now. You don't have to wait for a conversation. Jot it down in your journal and maybe some steps that you want to follow to meet that goal. So these are things you already know that you need to know. Then there are the things that you discover that you need to know. If you take meeting minutes, I know a lot of people really hate taking meeting minutes, but I want you to think about this another way. It becomes a resource for things that can go in your tech journal. So you hear terms, you hear acronyms along the way, and you can go ahead and create to-do items in your tech journal from those. Now the profile of the EA, if you are in that kind of a role, that is being raised. You're being less thought of as a target at which to throw information and more now as a resource for information. So the more you are comfortable with your company terminology and acronyms and process names, the more valuable you become on the job. Then you're not just sitting there listening to meeting minutes. You can actually notice, oh wait, I know what that means, and I wonder if they're thinking about this impact. And then you can either contribute there or alert your leaders, hey, I heard this thing in the meeting and I was wondering if this might be a problem or that might be a problem. But then you become more valuable on the job. Applications that you hear about that you want to learn to use. I was in social media the other day and somebody posted a question, which was, what is a great application to use to create a professional looking newsletter, but that's easy to use? Overwhelmingly, everybody came back and said Canva, Canva, Canva. So if I'm looking at that, even if I don't have that objective that I have to create a newsletter, it's like, well, my colleagues seem to know a lot about Canva. Maybe that's something I should know. Or you start hearing things, you keep hearing WordPress come up and going, well, maybe that can add value to me if I know more about that. So when you hear specific applications, now around applications, almost as soon as you hear about it, go out to YouTube, just look up a couple, 2, 3, videos about it, copy and paste those links to your journal so that when you are ready to learn about it, you can go in, hit those links and start learning. Over time, you will begin to identify channels on YouTube that are particularly useful. Either the trainer really meets you where you are, or it's coming directly from the manufacturer, the service provider of that app, but start to identify really great video learning resources so that you can add that to your search. That way, when you put those 2 or 3 links, you're ready to learn it. You can just hit those links and go, and you know you're going to get some quality information. Now, this is an interesting way to have items go into your tech journal, how-to questions you couldn't answer. Now, sometimes, and I used to like to do this because I am a geek, somebody would say, Melissa, how do you do this? And I look at them and say, I have no idea, but let's go figure it out together. And I would invite them around to my desk, and we would noodle around until we found the answer. Now, I'm going to suggest a step beyond that. Once you figure out what that answer is, the how-to, the clicks and typing that you have to do to accomplish this how-to, record it. If you are using PowerPoint, you can insert a screen recording. If you have Camtasia, anything that you have that can do a screen recording, then screen record the answer. You can save this out as MP3s or QuickTime videos out to a library somewhere and name the video the question. How do I add this bizarre, weird item to my expense report? Well, name it that, .mp3 or mp4, and then that is the video that you recorded to answer the question. So this is a couple of things. This is you being able to now answer this question, and it is also creating a learning resource for others. Knowing things is valuable. Being able to share that knowledge with others raises your profile as a resource for technical information in the organization. Anything tech related that you want to know. So if you follow the news and you hear about a new cyber attack, maybe you want to go look that up and see, maybe is our company vulnerable? Anything that hits you in your daily life that's tech related that you want to know more about, put that in there. You may never get to it. And so let me talk about that may never get to it part. Don't limit what you write in your tech journal. Write everything down that even in the moment is interesting. You may only choose to go after 25% of what you wrote down, but you then become in the habit of identifying things that would be cool to know, things that would be useful to know. You don't have to hit everything. I know that kind of seems counter to writing a list, but if you don't constrict what you're putting in there and being then choosy about what you choose to actually go after, you don't have to think too much about what goes in there. And if there's, do I write this down? Do I not write this down? Would it really be valuable for me to learn it? And now you're in this whole decision-making process and 5 or 10 minutes have gone by. Just write it down. You can also always go back later and draw a line through it if you choose not to do it. I don't know that I would erase it or delete it, because you might want to go back and change that later, going, you know what? This is interesting. I want to know more about it. It really isn't fitting in with my available time now, but let me leave it on there for some time later. So write everything in there, even if you only choose to go after a few things. So don't judge, don't judge what you write in there. Write everything down, strike out what you don't choose, move what you will work on later. You can even move it to another page, another notebook. Just don't judge what you write down. Now, looking at that big list of things to do can be overwhelming, kind of like opening your email in the morning. My good friend Larry Burns, one of the top computer security guys in the US, when he and I were working on a project together and we got hold of a project that was just huge. And I'm like, Larry, where do we even start? And he said, start anywhere and do anything. We had a large security gap to close. There were a lot of different things that had to be done. He's like, start anywhere and do anything. So as you're looking at your list, trying to decide what to work on, don't spend an inordinate amount of time trying to decide. Look at something, and what I promise you, what your eyes will go to are the things that interest you, and go for those. And if you don't get everything crossed off the list, that's fine. Those things that you are tying to a performance objective, well, those probably need a special highlight or symbol or something so that you make sure you do those. But for the rest of it, just start anywhere and do anything. And keep it simple. The simpler your method of tracking and recording what you want to know and what you learned about it, the more you are likely to use it. Now, I know you can have a gazillion columns in Excel or in a table, but maybe you don't need them. So keep your tracking mechanism simple so that you use it and you use it consistently. Hey, if you're looking for some things to put in that tech journal right away, check out Dirty Data and 101 Ways to Supercharge Your Productivity, which I co-wrote with Dr. Monica Seeley. Both of these are available on Amazon. And these could be some of your resources for how to do things that you identify in your tech journal. And also check out Watch and Learn. That's melissaesquibel.com/watch-learn. I've got a whole library of how-to videos out there on Google, on Microsoft, on electronic communications in general. And you can go out there and subscribe to that. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you have questions after the program, please feel free to reach out to me. You can find me on LinkedIn, Facebook, or write to me. If you go to melissaesquibel.com and hit that contact page, I will receive your question. Have a great day, everybody. Be well.